right, today is Tuesday, November 21st, 2023. This is Stephen Fagan and Ivy Albright, curators at the Sixth Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza. And the interview we're doing today is part of the museum's Oral History Project. And sir, I'll just ask you at the start to introduce yourself with your full name, date and place of birth, and a little background to get us started.
All right. Well, my name's Stephen Fillingim Stoli. I was born in San Antonio, January 25th, 1953, which was last century. And I grew up in San Antonio, and I was fortunate enough at 10 years old to see the tour of President Kennedy and Jackie in San Antonio. But my actual real history of being interested in presidential campaigns and presidential started in 1960 when my dad sat me down and had me watch the Kennedy-Nixon debates. And something clicked on him that just made me, from then on, follow those kind of things from LBJ to Nixon and I actually ended up in the 1970s and 80s working in 4 presidential campaigns. Sometimes volunteer, sometimes in the Texas campaign quarters. So I've always had my eye on the presidential one, and of course, November 22nd, 1963, like me and all my friends who were that age, it's set in our minds exactly what happened. And so I wrote a short story, sent it to you, and said, you know, I don't know why and I don't know how, but I decided to keep every newspaper for 7 days of that event, and I kept them in good shape, and so I'm going to donate them to the museum here for their archives. So that's why I'm in Dallas 60 years later.
Wonderful. Well, it's so nice to have you here, particularly at this important anniversary tomorrow.
Yes.
And it's a great pleasure to talk with you today. Let's go back. You mentioned the Kennedy-Nixon debates. As a young person, I can't imagine all of that stuff about Kimoy and Matsu was of particular interest to a young kid. What was it that you picked up on, at least as far as the personality or mannerisms of Nixon and Kennedy?
Well, I think that Kennedy had the charisma. There was no doubt about it. And I'd heard of Nixon before because he was vice president with Eisenhower. And I didn't understand probably half the things they were talking about. But to see 2 people up there who were going to be running our country, you know, doing a debate, and I think it was the very first debate ever as far as presidential candidates go. And my eyes kept going over to Kennedy just when he was talking. He just had the charisma. He was younger. He was my dad's age. My dad's sitting right next to me, same age. And I think all that just kind of clicked, and I thought, and then also a little further on, with Life magazine, that was the only way we got to see color pictures of them. And when you got to see color pictures of President Kennedy and Jackie, it was like, wow, this is just the coolest couple ever. They were almost like, you know, movie stars. You would think of them that way. And so that's how I kind of gravitated. And I think all of us kind of felt that way. I know he had his opponents, President Kennedy. But as far as young people go, and he did, we saw the Peace Corps. We saw things that happened or were happening, moving, that quite weren't going on in the other administration. So he did something. He changed something in America's persona and their thinking, and especially with young kids as young as 10 years old.
Here we are at the height of the Cold War. What do you remember about that? Duck and cover drills, things like that.
I remember being scared as hell, seriously, because we were in school at that time. We saw the map that said San Antonio was in the range of the missiles. We had 5 military bases there. We really thought that we were, after Washington, D.C., we were the next to go. And we had an air raid siren right next to our school, and that thing would go off as a drill, and we'd have to go either out into the hallway and cover our heads or get under our chairs. And we were really actually scared. I really didn't know how close we came until I saw the movie 13 Days, and how close we really came, you know, to actually having this war. And then I actually too met a gentleman years later in life who was on the destroyer, one of the destroyers that stopped, and he gave me his full account. So I was like, wow, we were really close, and I'm not feeling really good about what's going on today either. So,
did you talk with your parents about, like, Okay, in case of a nuclear war, this is what we're going to do. This is the family's plan.
I was going to go out in the backyard and dig a bomb shelter. That was my plan. I got about 2 feet down. That was about it. But yeah, we talked about bomb shelters. We talked about the school, the high school I had a bomb shelter. Well, it's a fallout shelter is what it was. It wasn't a bomb shelter. It was a basement, basically. But yeah, we did talk about what we should do, where we should go. They stayed pretty attuned to it, to the news, to Walter Cronkite, Huntley Brinkley, and I did too. Because of that whole time period, I didn't become a news hound, but I stayed more aware, I think, than my other fellow kids and stuff. I would get the paper and flip the pages and stuff like that. And again, half the stuff I didn't understand, but I think because of those incidents in that time period, those 4 years, 60 to 64, I stayed. That's what got me to be more attuned to politics, presidential, worldwide. But it was a very scary time for kids, and I really think for our parents too, because you just had no control over it. You didn't. So I suggest to all my friends to watch that 13 Days. I know it's dramatized and stuff like that, but it did show how close we came.
Before we get away from the 1960 campaign, Kennedy did visit San Antonio. He spoke at the Alamo.
Yes, he
any
did.
memories of him being in town?
I knew he was coming. It was from the newspapers. We did not, and we saw it on the newsreels, of course. A couple of my friends who are now longtime broadcasters in San Antonio, Deborah Knapp, and then Henry Cisneros was mayor, actually. They remember it too. I kind of been typing back and forth to them what I was doing up here. And we do, and it was because I've seen him on the debates and stuff. You were just naturally attracted. Whatever you saw in the paper, Life magazine, probably Time, Newsweek, that's how you got your news. It was not instantaneous like we have today. You had to read. You had to read or watch on TV, and you only got 30 minutes of national news. So I did not get to go, to that speech. But I have gone to others since then who have been in front of the Alamo. So it must have attracted me because I saw Ford there and some other presidents there.
Yeah. What do you remember growing up about segregation in San Antonio?
I can tell you where I first learned about segregation. And I didn't know till years later that I learned it at that time. But it was 1960, and we were going to the Majestic Theater downtown to see The Buccaneer with Yul Brynner and Charlton Heston. And we had to park behind the theater, and we were walking up the street, and there's a box office there. And so I walk up to that box office, and I remember my dad coming up to me, go, "Son, that's not our box office." And we had to go around to the front box office. That was for the blacks, and they had to sit in the balcony. I didn't realize it at that time, but it was years later when I started thinking about it, and I asked my dad, I said, why was that? I don't know why I remember that. He said, that's because they used to separate the African Americans from the whites. And I just went, really? Because I had friends that were black. I had, my dad had his own company. He hired quite a few blacks, and I thought they were great people. I didn't have anything against them. But I did read, we did have a sit-in at the Woolworth downtown San Antonio also. So I was aware of it, but it became much more aware when Martin Luther King came out and he gave the speech. And, you started going, what are we, I always thought, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? This doesn't make any sense because these people, my friends were great friends, so, but it was there. It was definitely there. I went to the wrong box office, so I know for sure that they used to segregate the theaters.
Did your schools desegregate while you were in
I did, I don't remember segregating. I don't remember it needing to be or talking about it or there was a busing or anything like that. I think that may have come a little later from my elementary school, but San Antonio was separated. There was the black part of town, there was the Hispanic part, and the white part. And so I went to school with probably more Hispanics than I did blacks, but that was just accepted there. It was not nobody said, oh, a black family moved in the neighborhood or something like that. I just never remember anything like that. So I remember reading about it or seeing about segregation in Alabama and Mississippi and Wallace, blocking the universities. So I stayed all attuned to that stuff. So I guess I was a news hound more than I thought. So
Here in Dallas, the Hispanics were generally treated as whites. It was a
Yeah.
separation between whites and Hispanics and African Americans.
R-
The Hispanics had their own prejudice that they had to deal with on a daily basis, but
Right.
collectively they were considered white. Was it the same in
Same-
San Antonio?
That'd be exactly the same in San Antonio.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was funny. It wasn't until years later I did my genealogy that I have a lot of Hispanic blood in me. But the Hispanics eventually married the Irish. And then my grandfather, who was he was Hispanic and Irish, he married an Irish girl, and then my mom married an English guy. So I look definitely Irish and English. But my Salvador Rodriguez, my 12th great grandfather, was one of the Canary Islanders that helped settle San Antonio back in 1718. So the bloodline there goes a long way. So I tell them I have some Hispanic blood in me.
Yeah.
I didn't know it at that time, but yeah, it was basically like that. The Hispanics and the whites were pretty much together.
What about the space program? Was that something you were interested in?
Oh, I loved the space. I used to lay out on my cot at night in the backyard and look at the stars for hours. And I even bought one of those astronaut capsules, like in the Mercury thing, where it was made of cardboard and you go inside of it, and it was just nothing. You can push anything, but all the buttons were there. But I found out, I don't know, a little later, that astronauts had to be really good in math, and I was terrible in math. And I thought, and I'm probably going to be too tall, and I won't fit in the capsule. But yeah, the space thing, and that was the whole thing about Kennedy too. He pushed it, said we're going to go to the moon in '69, and so we even when in '69, those kids like us, we were like going, they did it. They did it. They got to the moon, like Kennedy said. So it was also, and maybe because we were young, but it was also new. It was everything was new. Everything was exploration. You learned, and that's the case of being young anyway. I wrote a little short story called "Maybe It Was the Time," and how sometimes we just get used to stuff, and we don't have those same strong feelings or new feelings about discovery. Is what it was. But yeah, I followed it, and I followed it when the Apollo 1 got burned up, and White was from San Antonio originally. He's got a school named down there after him. So. Yeah, that was a big part of our growing up, was the space program.
Do you recall where you were, what you were doing when we landed on the moon?
Oh yeah, we were in high school. I was 16, and at first I was down in the corner with my friends. Back then we didn't have phones, so we gathered on corners to talk, And then we all noticed the time is up. They're supposed to, land. So we all went to our houses and gathered with our families. And fortunately, in 1966, we got our first color TV. I remember coming home and seeing Bonanza in color for the first time. It was like, there's another discovery thing, like, wow, color TV. And of course, the moon landing wasn't really in color, but it was so cool to see the whole happening. And I think we were like the rest of the world. We were just jumping up and down. And, you see those news clips from England and all over the world. And, I think somebody said one time that was the last time the whole world was together on something. I mean, we were all really pulling for something, happy for something. It may have been Apollo 13, though, too, to get them back home. But it was a feeling of the world, really coming together as one for something that was really cool.
Well, with the new Artemis missions, we're going back to the moon.
I know, and I went to NASA and I saw it. Wow, that was really cool. Orion and all that kind of stuff. So I was like a little kid again, going back and seeing that. That's a huge rocket they're
Well,
using.
I think your childhood self would be happy to know Orion can fit 99% of the human percentile, so they can.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, so it can fit a person up to 6 feet tall.
Really?
Or even taller.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that not Glover. One of the astronauts right now is pretty much at that. He's almost 6 feet tall, if not taller, and so they were having conversations at NASA about whether or not he'd be able to exercise on the rover on Orion in space.
Well, I figure if William Shatner can go in space at 90, maybe there's still hope for me. So.
Yeah.
But,
So you talked a lot about how your dad influenced you with watching the Kennedy-Nixon
Mhm.
debates and stuff. So I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate a little bit more about how that impacted your career as an adult. You said you worked on 4 presidential campaigns.
right.
Can you talk a little bit more about those?
Well, like I said, I got interested and I watched, everything. I even knew Goldwater was going to get slaughtered. I mean, I knew it before even the election, because I read. But my dad had 2 sayings for me. He said, "You never know till you try, you never know till you ask." And that's been my motto, and it's gotten to me a lot of places I would never have been to by just asking or trying. And this will be kind of funny. I was at UT in '72 when McGovern ran against Nixon. And I was at UT, and so I worked for the McGovern campaign.
So you were at UT.
I was at UT, and of course, we were against the war. We were against, I wasn't a real hippie. I had my hair long, wasn't a true hippie. But McGovern, wanted a peace in Vietnam and bring the boys back and stuff. So a funny story, though, that goes along with that with my dad is that I used to be from Austin to San Antonio was 45 minutes, used to be. So on Thursdays, I would go down to San Antonio. My mom would wash my clothes and I'd get a home-cooked meal and I'd be back for 10 o'clock the next morning. Well, I came home and my dad came home and he said, "Is that your truck out there?" I said, "Yes, sir, it is." He said, "Is that your McGovern sticker on that truck?" I said, "Yes, sir, it is." He goes, "You want your car? You want your food? You want some dinner? You want your clothes washed?" "Yes, sir." So I wanted my clothes washed, so I took the sticker off. Of course, I went back and put a new one on, and he was, he was a Republican. He was conservative. He wasn't a dictator or anything. But that was my first time to work in a campaign. And then when I graduated, believe it or not, in '76, I worked in the Reagan office in Austin for his campaign, which is, for me, another guy with charisma. He had the right message like Kennedy did to me. And so I worked on 3 of his, either volunteering or working in their campaign. And it was just, as close as I could be. That's why I love the series West Wing. I just think it shows the human side of, the whole politics and what goes on. But I kind of saw that in working in those campaign offices. But yeah, so that's, I think, the Kennedy-Nixon debate started for me as a 7-year-old kid.
Well, let's go to November 21st, 1963. Kennedy's trip to Texas. San Antonio is the first stop.
Right.
Walk me through your day.
All right. Well, I was actually sick for 2 days. I think I just had a cold. And that Thursday, my mom said, "Let's stay home one more day, but I need to go to the bank today." And now my mom and my dad realized they canceled each other's vote out in 1960. My mom voted for Kennedy, like most women probably did. And she said, "We need to go to the bank." And the bank was on Broadway. And so I was aware he was coming, but I had no idea we were going to go down where the parade route was. And so we went into the bank, and then we came out, and I think she knew. She planned it. She knew they were coming. So we were on the side of where Jackie sits, and we saw the lights and everything coming down. I goes, what is that, Mom?" She goes, "That's the president and Jackie." I went, "Whoa, I'm going to see him live. I've seen him in Life magazine. I've seen him on TV." And when they drove by, I, like every other kid, could swear that Jackie waved directly at me. And she had her black pillbox hat on and a white suit and stuff. And I saw Mr. and Mrs. Connolly, but that wasn't as big to me, back then. But and it was just like she knew me. From then on, Jackie knew me because she waved at me. And I will say in my story, those whole 3 days, I kept telling my parents, "I have to go to Washington. Jackie needs me. She needs me up there." And of course, they said, "No, I think she's okay." I said, "No, she waved at me. She knows me. She needs me." And so that's how, emotional I was. I was ready to take a plane or whatever else to get to Washington, D.C. to help Jackie out. So, and the parade went for quite a long time. There was quite a few people on that side, but he had just gone through more of a neighborhood, so it was kind of more thinner, and a couple of high schools. So there was all the high schools and the schools along the route got let out. And of course, it was big coverage on the TV, the San Antonio TV. In fact, it was very interesting to see it. I looked at it again a couple of nights ago, and back then, International Airport used to have a balcony above the tarmac, and there was hundreds, thousands of people up there with JFK signs and stuff like that. And to see that was like, takes you right back. It was like 15 minutes ago. When you get to this age, everything back there is like 15 minutes ago. What happened to those other 60 years? Boy, that was just 15 minutes. So, well, I had no idea he was going to Houston, and then heading to Fort Worth. And we did talk about it the next day at school, that he came, and we talked about it. We had a picture of him in our classroom, of President Kennedy and Lincoln. And I got to tell them, I saw Jackie, I was beaming. I was like, I'm special. And then, the knock on the door, and asked our teacher to come out, Mrs. Matthews, and that's when we knew that, I don't know if you want me to, she came back in crying, and she could barely get it out. Said, boys and girls, our president, somebody shot at our president in Dallas. We don't know if how bad he's hurt, but he has been shot at, and so has our governor. And we just froze, like, whoa, this doesn't happen. What is this? This was, we were into Camelot. Our thought ideas were, and our parents were just like the Kennedys. It was Camelot, and we just all froze completely and just looked at each other like, is this a bad movie? What? And then there was another knock on the door. She started to talk a little bit about it, and the teacher asked her to come out again. And it was 30 minutes later, whenever Walter Cronkite announced it. And she came back in and said, the boys and girls, our president is dead. And just cried. We just were, it was almost you couldn't console us. We didn't, we couldn't compute this. How could just something like this ever happen? And of course, there was all kinds of crazy reports about, Jackie was hit and this happened and all kinds of, but they were told that we were going to close the school and everybody has to go home. And I can say 99% of the people, their mother stayed at home. It was, that's society back then. So I remember us walking home, but we were told to be completely silent on the way back. And I had about 4 blocks to the house, and I remember 2 girls talking, and I told them to shut up. They said, be quiet for the president, you shut up. And so we did. We walked back, and I got back. My mom was crying on the TV, and then we were just glued for the TV. And I may be wrong. Well, I'm right about the TV used to go off at midnight, and you get the Indian, in the Star Spangled Banner. But if I'm correct, they did 24 hours, and I may be wrong on that.
You're right.
Okay, so that's the first 24-hour news cycles we ever had, because otherwise you just got 30 minutes in the afternoons. And so I remember us laying on my parents' bed. We didn't want to, they had a TV. We didn't want to be far from our parents, and everything, the whole world revolved around what was going on, those 3 days. And not knowing what was going to happen, with capturing Lee Harvey Oswald and then saying he was the assassin, and then of course with the Sunday morning with Ruby, as a kid again, we were going, what is happening in this world? We don't understand this, We had not been in a war like our parents had been, World War II, about people being killed and stuff. So we read about Lincoln, but that was a long time ago. It was in books, and we just looked at each other. What just happened? And so we just couldn't understand. So the feeling of uneasiness, like I told you, I was getting queasy coming up here, was just. It was 24 hours, and you had your mom to console you. They would hug you and hold you close and stuff. So. And we went that Monday. We went to church because it was a National Day of Mourning. Sunday, I guess we went. No, Monday was a National Day of Mourning, and so we went to church, and of course the funeral. And I'll never forget the drums, and and to see Jackie, this lady who waved at me just a few days before, now dressed in black, and she was, she was so stoic. I mean, she was just, I don't know, it still just throws all kinds of emotions in me. And I really believe, I saw Clint Hill said that was the end of the innocence, and then, to this day, I know there were so much other things going on, but to us, it was the end of the innocence. Something happened and changed us then. And then we had the Vietnam War on our plates and on TV every day and these things. And then you had how Malcolm X was killed, Martin Luther King was killed, RFK was killed, all in 4 or 5 year period. So you're just going, what's next? What is going to happen next? So we lived through it, which reminded me that we've lived through every president, whether you liked him or not, whether you liked his policy or not. We all, we lived through it. We adjusted. We did what we had to do. But that 8 years was just, as far as a young kid goes, was just something else. And, the moonshot was one of our highlights. It was something good. So.
Yeah. Was this the first time that you had seen the adults in your life express that kind of emotion openly?
Yeah. My mom before, she would, I'd see her cry a little bit here and there on a movie or something like that, but I'd never seen my dad upset. My dad was a stalwart guy. I mean, he owned his own business for 30 years, so he was an MP for Patton, but he wasn't like military type. He was my hero. He was, and yeah, I saw a definite difference in him. Even though I know he was Republican and stuff like that, he knew that no man, no matter what your political differences are or what you've done, no man deserves to die like that. No man should ever have to. And so it was a real family bonding period. It really did. In fact, that next week, we decided we'd have a cabin up at Medina Lake. We decided to go spend Thanksgiving there, spend 4 or 5 days, and we didn't have TV or anything, just to be thankful and decompress, But it definitely, I think a lot of people will tell you that the families really pulled, more than they ever had before.
The school kids at that time didn't have the benefit of counselors to help them process what they were feeling and seeing on TV, unlike with 9/11.
Yeah.
Do you think that would have been beneficial to you? Do you think you still have some unprocessed trauma?
I think I do, actually. I think I do. I think every time I see the Texas Book Depository, anytime I see this drive down here, something still comes up in me that I can't stop. It's there. No, they just told us to go home. That was it. Go home, get your books, and go home. And so the family was the counseling, I guess, the processing deal. But it probably definitely would. I'm glad they have it now, because you should need to talk about it, and you should, and I think my parents did. I think we talked. We cried. I mean, my brother cried. We were, it was very upsetting. And what I think was the interesting part of all these newspapers is 1 week later, the high school football game of the century was on. It was Lee versus Brackenridge. Everybody had been looking forward to this game. And 22,000 people showed up at Alamo Stadium for a high school game. And they had a special thing for President Kennedy, and before that. But I think that's where, looking back now, I found out that, life has to go on. You do have to keep going. You can't stop, And when I read the newspapers, I saw the reflection of that they did put out Christmas advertisements in here, that Wonderland Mall and stuff. And so life, it didn't just go back like that, go back to being the same way, but it took a long time, but life did continue on. But I think counselors would have helped.
Before you show some of these newspapers you brought, you mentioned, I think, that you were out sick, that it was an absence on Thursday. So when you went to school Friday morning talking about seeing the president, was that questioned at all?
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, yes. I told my mother had to go to the bank, and so she had to take me because she couldn't leave me at home. So, yeah, I had some explaining to do. Okay. Now, I did have a written note from my mom that said I was sick, and she gave it to the principal. So it was legitimate. I really was sick, but it was sniffles by then. So yeah, I got a little bit of a.
Well,
You
were
just
forcibly
reminded me
so-
of that. I just.
You were forcibly taken to see the president.
I was.
You had no choice.
No choice. My mother was going to see President Kennedy, whether I was in my deathbed or not. Yeah.
And I bet you're really glad she made that
Oh,
decision.
yeah. That obviously is why it just hit me so hard that Friday that those that young couple and that young president, was taken down like that. And of course, we didn't see the Zapruder film stuff till Life magazine a year later or 6 months, something like
They
that.
published some frames pretty quickly thereafter.
Pretty quickly?
But the film itself wasn't seen on TV till 1975.
Geraldo, right?
Geraldo, yeah.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was talk about reliving. Sitting there, go, no, oh my God.
Well, let's talk about your newspapers.
Okay.
Walk us through some of what you saved here.
Well, these are some 7 days plus one of the San Antonio Express News. We had 3 newspapers back then. San Antonio Express News, San Antonio Evening News, San Antonio Morning News, and the San Antonio Light. And so, for some reason, I put these underneath my bed for years and put them in boxes. I have to give Mom my credit for taking them and keeping them for my college years and all that. But, of course, it started with this day, obviously, when the president was killed, and that was an extra that came out that afternoon. And, of course, the stories in here are a lot of things that were disproven. They were just speculation back then. But every day, this is another place where I started reading the newspaper. Every day we would have, something new. And I'm actually giving one, too, where December 5th, John Connally comes out of the hospital finally. And that's where I knew Connally was governor, but I didn't know a whole lot about him until this happened. And then so when he got out of the hospital, I thought, okay, that's a important part. But anyway, there's 7 days plus that. And
Did your family take all the San Antonio newspapers?
yeah, everybody did.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, even the 2 Sunday the Light and Express News on Sunday.
Wow. Here in Dallas, it was either the Morning News or the Times Herald. You didn't have a lot of people with both subscriptions.
Yeah, no, we'd have the morning paper and then the evening paper, and a lot of times the stories were pretty much the same.
We don't have to go through
Okay,
all of them, but
well,
I'm curious,
here's the one with the Brackenridge.
Yeah.
Okay, that's Life Goes On 7 days later, which was true. So, and that was named the high school game of the century for that last century.
So holding that paper, 60-year-old paper, here in the Texas School Book Depository, a day before the 60th anniversary, what does that mean to you with that paper in your lap?
I think it gives me full circle for a feeling of, well, I've come here to honor President Kennedy, and I'm glad that the museum can use the newspaper. It's something I wanted to do for 60 years, actually. But I know now I feel like I've completed my mission, I guess, and that I'm here for it. I have my high school Facebook people, they're all following me on this journey because, they all wanted to know, they had the same feelings. So it's almost a little surrealistic to be holding this in the Texas Book Depository in the museum. It's kind of like, wow, what a journey, 60 years.
Did the assassination characterize how you viewed Dallas?
No, I was real upset that Texas, in Dallas and Texas, was getting blamed. I especially when they said Oswald was Russian and all this kind of stuff. And I did see a newsreel the other night where people in New York were going, those people in Texas, and I know it got a bad rap for quite a long time. But I thought that was unfair, and I was just upset that it happened in Texas. I didn't want it to happen anywhere. But to happen here in the last day of his, of course he was going to Austin the next day. But yeah, I did read about it and hear about it, and it lasted for quite a while. Dallas was not the place to go.
Yeah. When did you first see the site of the assassination?
1964. We were going to the opening of Six Flags Over Texas. And we drove here, and you could see it. plain as day, and my stomach sunk. And that's the only time we saw it. We didn't come drive by it this way. We saw it from the freeway, and I just went, oh my God, that's where it happened. And my stomach did just sink. I mean, it was just a surrealist. And I've been to Dallas a few times, but that was a punch in the gut,
Humor me for just a minute. What was it like to go to Six Flags in 1964?
It was cool. It was cool. It was, it was more the original type Disneyland stuff, teacup, that type of stuff. But and banana splits. I don't know if you remember the banana splits, but and I have a picture of me with one of those Swiss hats on with the big, feather with my name written across it, and. We stayed at a Ramada Inn, with the swimming pool. But yeah, and they had the first time I ever saw black light. They would stamp your hand with that black light stuff, so that's how you went through the queues and stuff like that. But yeah, it was a magic place. We had fun. Yeah.
I know way too much about theme parks. The boat ride called the Cave opened with the park in '64. Do you remember? That would have been brand new when you went.
Yep, I remember that. Yep.
The Spelunkers.
Yeah, the Spelunker. Yeah. There you go. Yeah, it was very cool. And then I think it was after that the banana splits came out, and some of their opening shots were at Six Flags.
Yeah, that was closer to the early '70s.
Oh, was it? Okay. I get those confused. I was a big fan of banana splits and HR Puff and stuff. And those, but they were later. So the family came
up from San Antonio for a Six Flags vacation. I mean, that was the destination.
That was the destination for us. Yeah, okay. But I remember my dad did say we're going to go by the depository. So look out to the right here. Okay, it's coming up. So he was informing us that was there. I don't know. It might have been too traumatic for me to come here as an 11-year-old to see that, to actually stand there, and because I got let off right over here at the corner, and I stood there and I went, oh, I can see them coming down Elm right this way and then turning on. Are you coming down Houston?
It's Houston and Elm.
Yeah, it's coming down Houston. I stood there for a second. I went, wow. Yeah. So I really, really appreciate what y'all do. This story never needs to ever just go away. It needs to continue on. So when I found out you had the museum, this has been years ago, but I was just so pleased that I don't like to see history die. It just shouldn't. We learn from it.
Before we wrap up, what are your thoughts today on Oswald or a conspiracy?
I think I'll put it this way: there's probably a conspiracy. There's so many. I've watched a lot of your YouTube things on people different. I'm thinking there probably was a conspiracy. Whether there was a shooter out there at the knoll, I don't know enough to say. I don't know. I think maybe it wasn't one person. My biggest thing is that no man should ever die like that, whether it's a conspiracy or not, whether it's one person or not. That should have never ever happened, and that's the way I feel about it. I won't argue a conspiracy one way or another because I just, these guys that write all these books and stuff, I'll let them, do that part. But I don't know if the story will ever be completely told or not. They're even telling stories about Lincoln to this day about conspiracy. Well, we know what some of those people did. So, but yeah, I think there was a shooter up there. I think there was one shooter up there. Oswald, but whether there was another one, I'll let the real guys, talk that one out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have anything?
No.
I would tell you this one more thing.
Please.
I would hate to know there was a conspiracy. I would hate to know that CIA, Mafia, Cubans, Russians, I'd hate to know that actually happened, that somebody conspired together to do that, which is usually how it happens, but so that's my thoughts on that.
All right. Well, we thank you so much for making the trip here and for sharing these newspapers with us.
Well, thank you very much. This was a real experience. I'm about to be a great-grandfather, so I'll tell my great-grandkid about this one. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you'll get a copy of this, and everybody will know
All right.
it was in a museum. So.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.